Welcome to the Reimagine podcast. Each week, give yourself 30 minutes and meet the people working hard to create the future of insurance today.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of the Reimagine podcast. Laura, good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to be here. It's, always a lovely day in the neighborhood. And we have a guest here with us today who's actually joining us from this evening. So it's a little bit of a time warp we have going on today, but I think it's well fitting to our conversation.
Yeah. And Shamir, welcome to our show. And Laura, it's 10 hours. You've teased the audience.
I have indeed. And we'll get to Shamir's story in a minute, but he's joining us from India this evening on his end, morning on our end. But Shamir Joseph is a design thinking consultant who works with organizations and individuals around the concepts and the execution of design thinking, one of which is he works with IDOU. So we're excited, Shamir, to have you on the show with us today to learn more about what is design thinking? How could we implement it? Where is it seen? Maybe we're doing these things and we're not even sure of it. And for those who are really well versed in it already, I'm sure you're going to have some very interesting examples to provide us.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul and Laura. I'm glad to be here. And yeah, let's get started.
Yeah, well, Shamir, tell us what is IDOU? And I think I just butchered the name.
Yeah. Yes, you did. But it is one of those names where you hear it and then you hear it the first time, you're like, okay, that's how you say it. So it's actually IDO. Like EYE.
Yes.
And this is a design thinking organization that's global. And I work with IDOU, that's the teaching arm. So we teach a lot of learners and organizations around the world about design thinking. And whenever we think of design thinking, right, most people, when they hear it, they're like, okay, design thinking is sort of like a tool, right? Just how in engineering you would have certain tools or in any industry. But the beauty of design thinking, right, once you actually start getting to know that, is that it's a mindset. It's not a tool that's very specific to any organization or specific to any industry. It is a way of thinking. So how I like to put it is design thinking is a mindset and a way of thinking of how to solve problems creatively and come up with innovative solutions. And I've seen people from all industries apply it in different ways with different backgrounds. So it's really beautiful to see how that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. So if essentially, I'm not just going to try and make the machine run faster. Maybe I need to rethink the problem the machine was trying to fix, right, or do. Is that a good way to think about it?
There are various facets to design thinking, right? So first of all, sometimes the thing what we think is the problem is not actually the problem. So that's why a big part of design thinking is empathy, right? Understanding where your user is coming from, defining what the real problem is, right? And then through that process, discovering, you having interviews, observing your user. And a lot of times when we do things, right, we have our own assumptions. Like I have been a designer in this field for like, say, 10 years, right? So I see a problem, what I think is a problem, and I'm like, this is the solution for it. But sometimes it may not be true, right? Our assumptions tend to come in. And through the design thinking process, we have, there are ways in which you test your own assumptions by having quick tests, by having interviews. Because sometimes if you observe something, like if you observe one thing, and you may think that this is what the deduction is based on your assumption. But actually, it might be something else. And you can only find this out by having interviews, by getting into the user journey and empathizing with themselves, having an empathy experience, right? So you sit down with that machine that you're trying to, you see how the user is, what the journey is. And accordingly, as you go through that, you take out those assumptions and you actually test quickly. And that is what design thinking is. And it really brings up innovative solutions. And one of the best parts of design thinking that I personally love is it forces you to be creative, because the certain mindsets that we talk about, that creativity that comes in, how do you come up with innovative solutions, right? When you were kids, we were so, you always ask questions. You always come from that perspective, right? So we say things like, think like a child. And what's really funny is in the business world, when you tell people business to, think like a child, they just look at you and they're like, we're paying this person for this. And so how I like to frame it is think like an alien, right? So let's play a game, right?
Oh no, Laura's great at games.
All right, let's do this.
Oh, that's awesome. So, Laura, what is this?
By conventional standards, that's a tape measure.
Yeah, as a human, yes. Okay, so
As a human,
Laura has
yes.
answered that. As a human, this is a tape measure. Let's see, what else do I have? Okay, Paul, what is this?
That is a dry erase marker.
Yes, it is. So it's a marker for a whiteboard. Now I'm
Yes.
going to ask you to observe it as an alien, right? Who's seeing this for the very first time. What do you think this could be?
Well, it could be a stuff counter. It could be a pushing rod. It could be something for me to get a spider web out of a corner. It could be something for me to itch the dog with. It could be something for me to... I see all
Back
sorts of
scratching,
possibilities. Yeah.
See? What about you, Paul? What about this? What do you think this could be as an alien? If you saw this for the first time.
It could be projectile. It could be a right. Could be a. It could be a strut from something, right? If I were a very small alien, that may be a tower.
True.
Wow.
Very true.
That's amazing. So that's the thing, right? When we're kids, we've probably played with these things like a weapon, or we've played with this, to scratch our backs, or just like a toy, making noises. And that's the creativity in us that's asking us, seeing things for the first time, experiencing it, understanding what it could be, not just what it is, but what are the other possibilities of it, and how else this can be used. And that's where innovativeness comes, right? But when you tell people to be a child, they're like, I'm not really sure how that works. But you tell people to be an alien, these things automatically come out, and it's really beautiful. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm a believer in aliens, but I'm definitely a believer in being an alien. Just to get into that child's mindset.
Okay, I love this, Shamir. Okay, have you ever been called an anthropologist with a purpose? Maybe I see a lot of similarities with how you're approaching.
I like that.
The world.
I like that you say with a purpose. What my tagline for my life would like to be: playful with purpose.
Okay.
Okay.
So I don't know about anthropologists, but definitely playful with purpose. Because I've always been that kid that's asked why, and luckily I found an industry that actually encourages me to be playful. So a lot of the design thinking mindset, like thinking like a child, this is to get your mind divergent, because we are engineers, or we're doctors, or we're in financial institutions, or we get through those system of education, we get very good at converging. But diverging, going creative, we think, oh, it's for the creative fields, it's for the arts, it's for this. But creativity is a mindset, right? The more you practice, the more you make it. It's like a muscle. The more stronger it gets. So yeah.
So Shamir, tell us, how did you take us through your journey to working for such a prestigious organization and doing this around the globe? What was your journey?
Well, I started off as a mechanical engineer in a college in India, and our first things, right? And we were part of a Formula One racing team for students.
Wow!
So we built our own Formula One cars. Prototyped it, tested out, built it, welded it, crashed it. Yes, and
hopefully you weren't in it. Hopefully you weren't in it, right?
Luckily, I wasn't the driver, so I didn't take the blame. But I had to, be the one that was welding it back. So
it wasn't that fire episode in the F1 series on Netflix. I don't know if you watched that. You watched the F1?
Yes, very much.
The fire one?
Yeah.
No.
Coincidentally, that happened in Bahrain, and that's exactly the country where I was born in. Yeah.
Oh,
so
interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you've done that. Mechanical engineer came naturally to you, and I'm sure engineering makes sense. What's a problem? How do I solve it? Oh, maybe I rethink the problem.
You would think that it should come naturally, but the thing is, sometimes these structures of education, right, they force us to think in a certain way, and that divergent part really came when I started exploring more outside my curriculum, and I came across design thinking in this whole world. I'm like, why isn't anyone having this? Like, why don't my fellow classmates have this, right? And that's when we started exploring stuff. We started building things. We started exploring in this. And I took one of IDEO courses and got in touch with the team. And that's how today, working with IDEO. And I'm really blessed for this opportunity. And here we're talking to you about it. So this is even more amazing. Yeah.
So for people who might not be as familiar with design thinking, what's an exercise or a thought process or a material, you choose which path to go down, but what's something you'd recommend of a good place for them to start getting a further understanding of this?
So design thinking, there are a lot of materials and books out there that you can just Google and go through. But I would like to think of, if you want to start about design thinking, I would think of certain mindsets to practice, right? Simple things like having curiosity versus judgment. Like we talked about the alien, right? When you looked at this as a human, you straight away jumped to the conclusion that this is a tape. But if you strike it with curiosity first, right? You're like, what could this be? So curiosity versus judgment. So not judging things quickly, but being curious about it. And this also is very important in the divergent phase. When you have brainstorming activities, right? You have people working together in groups. Someone comes with a crazy idea and someone else is like, no, that doesn't work. and what you need at that time sometimes is a yes and, like, okay, yes, and we could do something like this. And you keep building on each other. You keep collaborating. That is another thing that's very important for design thinking. And very often we think about testing, right? Another mindset is about testing. And we think that if we test, the answer should be yes or no, because it's a test, right? But when we have yes or no answers, it ends right there. It's either yes or a no. So we don't test to prove. What we do is test to learn. Because if you test to learn, then the answer to a yes is yes, okay, why is it this so? No, okay, why is this so? And that's one of the things. And another part of design thinking is also constantly testing, right? But also not testing high fidelity, like a very low-fi prototype. So like if I have to build something, I would probably build it out of paper first. And I'll show you, do you think this is, or I'll build it out of cardboard. Something that's very scrappy, that takes you maybe a day to make it. And because of that, you're able to test things quickly. You learn quickly. And what I've always found is if you've shown people a prototype that takes a week and looks really good, they tend to be a little reserved in giving their comments, because they're like, okay, this person's project. But if you show them a scrappy prototype out of cardboard, they're like, yeah, this doesn't really work. I can tell you spent only like 5 minutes on this, so I'm going to give you my blunt, honest opinion.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it tends to be really work in cases. Scrappy prototypes, you can learn so much from it.
Well, tell us share with us some stories of when you've worked with people and what have you built, right, with prototypes that have led to successful projects or businesses.
Mm-hmm. So one example is I work with as an advisory member on the board for a startup in Peru, and what they're working on is on democratizing the access to refrigerated food in Peru, because they found out during the pandemic that 50% of people in Lima, Peru, did not have access to refrigeration. And because of that, they had to go to the markets daily to get their food, the vegetables, and that exposed them to more of the virus. So just having an access to a refrigerator, and these are very simple refrigerators, right? They're built out of clay. But this technology is not new. It's evaporative technology, which uses sand, water, and clay pots. It's been around for a long time. But just that information and having people test it out. And first of all, like when they built it, they wanted to build it and sell it to people. And they were wondering, how can we get these things? And they wanted to test it. And the biggest problem that they had was that they had to test it in that situation of COVID. How do you meet people? So what they came up with this innovative idea was, they already had people. They had this network that already existed of people who give food to low-income families. And so they used that network to teach people how to make this online. And they built workshops with them where people were actually making, and just by going through the process of, making it on their own, you see how people tend to use that. So instead of me, of the team, working to, create that product on their own and test it and then see if the user likes it, they tell the user how to make it and the user makes it on their own. So you have like 10 people doing the work of one person.
Interesting.
So,
do you find differences between in person or virtual? So you talked about they had used the option to have people build these on their own, but do you see a difference in how creative people are, or do they feed off the energy in the room versus over a Zoom or a virtual platform?
That's very true. So we are all moving to the phase, where we're going online and we're missing that in-person meets. And there are definitely a lot of things that happen in a room. Like, you just share a glance with someone. Here, if I share a glance, you're not sure who I'm looking at, right? You're not sure which screen. So there are a lot of things that are missing. But what I think when it comes to design thinking, it's a lot about the culture, right? So what is the culture you're creating? What is the atmosphere you're creating? And that I've seen can be created even if it's an online system. And so the people at ITO, I have never met any of them in person. We just see each other from different parts of the world, even the learners, but still that creator is there because it's the culture that's being fostered, the culture of always testing things, culture of trusting each other, that trusting the process. Because in the design thinking process, there's a lot of ambiguity. You're not sure where your thing is going, right? There's always, if someone asks you, what are you building? At the moment, you're like, okay, this is what it kind of looks like. I'm not sure. And in a traditional very organization, they'd be like, we've given you a week to do, and this is what you're showing us. What is this? So, but if that trust is there in the process, that you trust that you're going to go there and you will reach, then it will happen. I sort of like to think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. so you have the jigsaw puzzle, your 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. You've laid it out on the table. You're not sure what the picture looks like. First of all, what you do is lay it on the table. You connect things on the edge. Because the corner pieces, right? They have straights and then the straight edge. So you've got the corners. You start filling some of the things. You see, okay, this connects. This connects here. You've got a few blobs now here and there. You start putting it out, and then that's when the picture starts making sense. And that's a lot of the ambiguity which you deal with in design thinking. And if people do not trust the process, at that stage, many people will give up. Many people will say like, this is not working for us. But if you trust the process and there's a culture where that ambiguity is allowed, it's encouraged, and you trust the people, then definitely it will happen. So creating this culture is very important, and that can be created online, and it can be created in virtual as well. There are different ways to do it, yes, but each has their advantages.
So would you say that, say bringing design thinking into a corporation, is it in theory bringing a mindset to an existing culture, or are you bringing a potential new culture into an existing mindset?
Wow, that's a very deep question. And it really depends on case to case, right? What is the culture? How rigid is the culture? How different is the culture? But design thinking itself is a mindset and a culture that can be adapted to how you work. And that's the beauty of it, because I said it's a mindset and it's a tool, and you can adapt it to what your situation is. It's not a bunch of, this is the tools, these are the steps, and this is what you follow. It can be adapted. And so it really is, in that sense, adaptable to what the situation is. But if the big challenges that come with when the culture is so different is, how do you get buy-in, right? So you have to make sure that the person who's inviting you in for that is, you bring them into the process, and you bring them into the process so that they can see what's happening. But at the same time, you make sure that when they come in, they do not bring any of the old culture with them, or they understand what space is about, right? What are the rules of the space? And we're not going to judge ideas. And at the same time, you have other individuals who maybe in that culture may not be that divergent because of the organization, and you foster their divergence, their thinking, so that they tend to be more creative and they are comfortable in that space, but they're not afraid of bringing their ideas, even if there's a senior person in the room. So it's all about sort of like facilitation, making sure that the person's in the room, but they do not have an effect on all the others who, if that person's in the room normally in the company, they might, not give such crazy ideas. So there's a knack of facilitation in that. That's very key, especially when you're bringing cultural moments and cultural shifts. You have to like get quick wins really fast, so people see the process happening.
Interesting. I guess culture is interesting. Like, let me ask you, how different if I have a bunch of 6 Americans on a be real specific, New Yorkers have 6 New Yorkers on a call like this versus say 6 in India. How much different do you have to go about making setting those rules differently? cross communities like that, or digital is digital, and people just, the design of the software is effectively the culture they're living in.
So when I say culture, what I really mean is how are people working together. And you would normally think, right, that if you live in different countries, the cultures would clash. But in my experience, working with people from all over the world, I've seen that it is not that case. It is not about where you're coming from, but rather how you think. And so very often, where you're coming from doesn't really matter or affect in that. Yes, it does bring the diversity, it does bring different thinking, but if the thinking is the same, your values of design thinking are the same, you share that same craziness to do things, to try things, to test things quickly, you work very well as a team, no matter what it comes from. So when I say culture, I don't really mean from their geographic location or their identity in that sense, but more of their way of thinking in that and working together.
Can you give an example of how, the design thinking has created partnerships that may not have come across organically in the first place? Well,
I think of I can give my career exactly like the very fact that I'm working with someone in Lima, Peru, right? And at the same time that we were working with an organization in Germany, right? And this organization was an NGO that was working to help refugee women in Germany and help them to become financially stable. So what we did was we created an event where people come in and they volunteer their time, and they, as design thinkers, so they do this in their jobs, right, in different fields. But here they come together on this same platform online from all around the world. There was in Malaysia, there was in UK, there was some in Africa, and from the US as well. They all coming together to create that space and come up with solutions for an NGO in Germany to a country which is somewhere else. And this happens because they have that same passion, for design thinking. They have the passion for bringing out a change for the refugees and using their skill set, which they normally use in their work, for this purpose. And this only can happen when you share that mindset, and also the online tools are available for such a thing to happen. So it's really beautiful, this age that we live in, where, sitting in India, I can work with people from all over, and it's really great because that different perspectives just broadens the possibilities that happen. So I say work from home, but it's like really working globally.
Yeah, it's interesting. What the pandemic's taken away has also given and created new possibilities, I think, in the world.
Yeah.
It existed before, but I think now everybody understands and is using it. So what's next, Shamir, for you?
So what I'm currently working with, I've always wanted to, as I mentioned in my college days, I was wondering, why don't people see this, right? Why is this there in education? And so what I'm working with a firm in India is they work with universities, engineering colleges, to bring design thinking education to that. So we're currently working with them to bring this into the curriculum and to have activities and show the mindsets of that, so that they have an early start. So they're not just thinking about, what the formulas are or what the perfect code is or what the, this thing. They have that proper mindset of diverging and the mindset of testing the things properly, so they can merge the two and come up with solutions rather than having to, come by design thinking by chance and then having to find their way through it. So that early exposure is something that I wanted. And so now I have the privilege to actually work in such a situation like that. So that's what's next for me. Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I have the opportunity next week to go into one of our partner universities, University of Hartford, and kind of give a talk on innovation with a professor who I've known throughout my career. And it's so interesting because a lot of what we're getting at is mindset and exposure to students before they get out of college, before they really dive into their careers. And to your point, start them early. And then as that goes through the process, it helps shape the formulation. Because, I will never see a tape measure in the same way again. I will always see it through the eyes of an alien. So I think if we could create more aliens, the world would be holistically a better place for so many reasons. So I love that, bringing it into the education field. And I'd be curious, have you ever come across a challenge or an alien example where someone has really just stunned you to say, oh my goodness, I would have never thought of that in a million years, or some kind of a solution that just has stood out for you?
Wow. That is something to think about, because there's been so many. And in mostly of the examples, we show them objects, we make them think. And someone said, I can't really think of an object right now that was there, but so many examples. Yeah. I think there was someone who said, if I remember correctly, I think it was a duster that they said. And the duster, so it was a play on the alien example. So they had to introduce themselves, take an object beside them, and tell in alternate reality what would this object be used for. So the person said, this is a duster, my name is so and so, and in alternate reality, this duster can be used to erase all those things you want to forget. So just grab it in your hand and you forget it. And I was just like, wow. Now, I won't say I tried it out, but I'm just saying that it's, yeah, people do find a lot of emotional attachment and things come up when aliens,
Interesting.
Truly out of this world thinking, in that sense.
Well, let me ask you. So, if we have an interesting group of listeners to our show, if they would like to avail you of ideas, recommendations, assistance, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. That's where all the action is, I would say. Yeah, LinkedIn.
So I don't know, Laura. Final thoughts, questions?
I would say it's my favorite question. Paul knows. What is it that when you get up in the morning, what drives you to do this day in and day out?
The fact that I get to play in my work and call it work, because I say playful with purpose, is what I love. Because it just gives me so much joy to see that being playful with purpose, when people have a lot of stress in these days, right? And they come to a call and they're learning things like strategy, they're learning things like business, really heavy loaded subjects, and you tell them into an activity where things like so for strategy, there was one thing like we asked, what is the use of a sandpaper toilet roll? Right? And people just go crazy at first, and then they find out real reasons for it. Like for a rhinoceros, it might be useful. What is the use of a glass hammer? So a glass hammer, maybe that if you hit something at a certain distance, like a certain force, it breaks. So you don't hit it with too much force, or it can be used like a mantelpiece, like an award. So seeing how people adapt this is really amazing, and just having them enjoy that time, but also with purpose of learning the actual things that need to be learned because of the course. Through that playfulness is what I love to do. So yeah, playful with purpose is my tagline.
Well, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. And it's interesting how a conversation around design thinking and really looking into what is it, how can it be used, turns into really a conversation about, values, trust, mindset, culture, and aliens. So we appreciate your insight. And for the show notes, we'll make sure to add the LinkedIn profile, of course, but then any other information or documents you'd like to make available to our listeners. I'm sure that they'd be interested in this. And I have so many interesting ideas on how we can do some social media follow-up with glass hammers and sandpaper toilet rolls. So I really appreciate that as well.
Yeah, this is great. Shamir, a pleasure to have you on our show and get to know you even better. And we absolutely want to stay in touch. And Laura, thanks. Thanks to our listeners, and tune in again next week for another episode of the Reimagine podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was amazing.
We want to especially thank today's sponsors, Launch and Symetra.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information about this company and other great startups at imagine.nfg.com.